Are you checking to see if it's live?
I can.
Okay.
How was it?
Oh. Okay. Okay, so I'm broadcasting now. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over a couple terminal tips that you may or may not be familiar with. Hopefully you're not familiar with all of them, or else this will be very boring for you. So first I want to start out with, can you see that up there? Yeah, okay. So first I want to start out with just like the bash init scripts, if you're familiar with them. So typically mine is right here. It'll either be something like .profile or .bash underscore profile. And then another common one is this .bash rc. And what happens if I take a look at the .profile. So this .profile script, every time you open up a new terminal window, this gets executed first before like anything happens. And so this is just like the default profile that gets created like on an Ubuntu installation. So like here's where it checks to see if you're running bash, and then if you are running bash, and then it checks for that bash rc file, and then this dot just means that it will execute that script as well. So it starts out with the .profile, and then within this script, it checks to see if that exists. If it does, then it executes that next. So we'll take a look at that .bash rc file. Now this is usually where I put a majority of my configuration. Well, most of this is actually default in Ubuntu. So like it starts here and then down to and then down to here is the default stuff. And this is another thing similar to the bash rc. If you want to set up aliases, if you're familiar with aliases, it's just like giving a shortcut for common commands that you might run. So if you run like this one, setting it the command ll to ls-alf. So if you run like ls-al all the time, you can set up an alias for it, so you don't have to type the flags every time. And you can check to see if something exists for it already. So if I say like alias ll, it'll tell me that something exists. If you go like alias blah blah, then it tells you it's not found. So you could set something up. So I could set up an alias. So a lot of times what I end up doing, if I cd into a directory, I'll automatically do like an ls, like just to see what's in there. So we could change, we could do like cdls equals, or actually I'd need a function for this. So you can also create functions. If I open up the bash rc file again. So like here's a function that I've created for automatically creating gitignore file. If you're not familiar with gitignore, it's you set it up in your Git repositories, and if a file pattern matches it, it won't like commit it into Git. And so it's super easy. This gitignore.io site, if you go to it directly, you can search for like common languages. So if you if you're doing something in Python, you type in Python, hit create, and then it gives you like a typical gitignore file for that. But so what the function that I made, all I have to do is type GI and then Python, and then it automatically pulls that from the website. And so what you can do, if I make a temp directory and go into it. So let's say this is going to be a brand new Python project. I can do GI Python and direct it into .gitignore. So that outputs everything that it pulled from the website into the .gitignore. So if I print it out, there it is. And so it's super easy for setting up a new project. Just do GI, and then you can do it with multiple things. Like you can do Python, Java, PHP, and it'll give it to you for everything. Oh, it looks like PHP doesn't exist in it, but here's the Java stuff. So you can do it with multiple things as well. So if we take a look at that function again. Oops. So with the function, this is where it's pulling what I passed in when I called it. This is just like a bash script thing. So this is saying that it's we should get an array of stuff. So $@ is an array. So if we wanted to make our own function, oops, like cdls. And then so what we would do is cd into $1 is going to be the first parameter that you pass into the function. So we can do cd into 1 and then just do an ls-al. So now if we do so cdls into code. So now we're in code and it automatically did the ls. If everyone saw that. But yeah, so you can make up your own functions for common things that you do. And with bash, it's just like whatever parameters you pass in, it goes $1, $2, $3, and you can do way more complicated stuff if you know like typical bash scripting commands and stuff. So that's so if you have functions and aliases that you want to be available all the time, you want to put those like in your bash init scripts, so that since those get sourced every time you open up a new terminal, those will just be available. Because since I didn't define this in an init script, if I close this window and open it back up, that function wouldn't be available. So another thing that you typically do in the init scripts is modifying your path variable. As how many people aren't familiar with like how the path variable works and like what it's used for? Okay. So what the path is, and I'll echo mine. So it's an environment variable, and when you type in a command, so like when I type in Python, oops. So what it does is whenever you type in a command, it looks through your path variable from left to right to see if that command exists in any of those directories. And so with that being said, you could have multiple instances of a Python executable. So like you could have one, so like there could be one here in user local bin, and I could also have one in this in my home directory .local/bin. And this one in .local/bin would trump the other one because it comes first in the list. So to actually see that happen, I'm gonna edit my bash RC file. Where am I? Okay, so I'm going to take away this front part, which is where that one Python executable was. So now if I write that, and if you change it, the script, and you don't want to close it and reload a new terminal, you can do source and then bash RC, and that'll run it and basically reload your environment. Okay, so that's done now. So if I do which Python, so now it found in user bin Python. And so if you remember the first time I did it, it found the one in my home.local/bin. And so with the path variable, you can, so like this user bin Python is the default installation with Ubuntu. But it's, if we look at the version of it, it's 2.7.6. So if I wanted like 2.7.13, I think is the newest one, I can install it myself and then install it in a different directory and then put that towards the front of my path variable so that it won't use the old version on the system. So that's really nice and neat. If you didn't know that, it helps in the future with installing new commands and stuff. Let's see. So actually I had some slides here. So one thing that's kind of neat that I just found the other day is with those init scripts. People typically refer to them as dot files since they start with a dot, and they mainly do with the configuration of your system, like the path variable and stuff. And so what people do is, like, if you got a new computer or something, you'd have to reset up all that stuff that you've done. And if you've had the same computer for a while, it could be a lot of different stuff. And so what people have done is they set up GitHub repos for their like configuration files. So if we take a look at this one, so this .files.github.io just gives some examples of people's repositories for their configurations. So if we take a look at one of these. So this guy's got his set up like in different folders. So like, and a lot of programs and IDEs have their own configuration variables, so it can kind of get out of hand depending on how many you have. So like in his Atom directory, he has the configuration variables, and then he's got some for Git, OSX preferences, and then this setup.shell script. What it does when you download and run it, it'll symlink the dot files to where they should be. So it just works like automatically right out of the box. So it's kind of neat and something that I've been looking into doing sometime is setting up a repo for my dot files. So next thing that I want to go over is something called Z shell. So typically by default with like Ubuntu, the default shell when you run your terminal is bash. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that. But there's also different shells that you can install and use instead of bash. There's so this one, ZSH, is Z shell. There's fish. There's like a handful of them that you can do. So I'd like to show you just what this is like. And I found this and I've actually started using this instead of bash. So you can do sudo apt get install ZSH. So that's going to install it. Okay. So we did that. So then if you do that, then you have to run this command. So what this is doing is changing the default shell to ZSH. So if we do chsh dash, what was it, dash S? Yeah. Okay. So now, and if you're not familiar with this, this is a way to like run a command. So what it's doing, that inner command, is doing which ZSH first, which gives us user bin ZSH, and then it's putting that as one of the parameters to change shell. And in change shell, you have to give the full path to the executable. So it's a easy way of doing like a command within a command.
That seems like typing in the which ZSH to PH.
We'll try that. Oops. Yeah, it's sometimes you have to use one over the other. Yeah, because some commands, like this is, if you do the pipe, it's like inputting it as if like you ran the command and then typed it manually, which like this isn't expecting that. Yeah, so now now that we changed it, to get it to work, you actually have to, it doesn't switch it until you log out and log back in. So I have to log out quick and then log back in. Okay, so this will show up the first time you run it. It gives you like a little GUI for setting up your Z shell configuration. Let's see. Which one do I want to do? Yeah, so I'll do one. Let's go to the main menu just to show like some of the different settings that it'll give you. So if we go to this one, history configuration, you can change number of lines of history, file where history is saved, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, to completion. So this is one of the cool features of Z shell, and I'll show you it after we get the configuration done. But so I'm gonna do one to turn on completion with default options. Let's see, let's look at 4. So one thing it can do as well, it can change to a directory given just a path. So if you forget to type cd and then the path, it'll see that it's a path and just change into it automatically. So we'll set that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, then we'll exit and save that. Okay, so now we are using Z shell. And so you can see that if you echo the shell environment variable, it'll give us the ZSH. And so now something that's kind of cool, if you're familiar with Bash, are trying to like change directories and you can't remember everything that's in there. If you hit tab a couple times, it'll list out like all the folders and files and stuff wherever you are. In Z shell, you can do the same thing. Oops. Oops. Let's hit D. So like you can do the same thing, and if you hit tab, it'll actually change it up there for you. So like in Bash, when you do it, it'll print them all out, and then you'd have to like start typing it yourself. But if you just hit tab, it'll like cycle through all the options for you, which is kind of cool. So then there we could see that option we set to, if we don't do CD, it'll just switch right into it. So there we can see that. Now, Z shell by itself isn't, it's pretty nice, but it's kind of bland. And there's actually this it's considered a framework called OMI ZSH, or OMI ZISH, whatever you want to call it. So what this is it's like a framework for ZSH, and it just like makes your terminal a whole lot better. So we'll install it here. It's super simple to install, just a curl command. So that'll download it and see like already. So with OMI ZSH, it gives you like plugins, and you can do different themes for your terminal to spruce it up a little bit. So like the default theme here, you can already see before it was like just all white, you know, and it didn't tell us where we were, like our path or anything. This one, it gives us some color, and it tells us that we're on the desktop. If we change, it'll show we're in the root code. It'll show us we're there. So by default, that's what it looks like. And so now if we go back to root, so that creates a so before we had the .profile and .bashrc. With ZSH, it creates its own, since it's a different shell, is this ZSHRC. So let's take a look at that. So this has, and once you install OMI ZSH, it adds a lot of options to here, and this is where you come in and customize it. So this ZSH environment variable is just where it's installed. I wouldn't change that. Here's where you can change to different theme names. So if we go back to the GitHub repository and go to the themes directory, this is all the different themes that you could use for your terminal. Some are better than others. But yeah, if we go here, I think it has like pictures for them. Yeah, so this within the wiki of the repo gives like some pictures for it's not all of the themes, but for a lot of them. just so you can like take a look and see what they look like. There's like a whole bunch of different options here, which is pretty cool. So let's say, let's see what looks like a decent one. Let's just try this one for the heck of it. So let's say we found this one, we want to try it out, see what it looks like. We can come into the file, and then you just paste the name that you found right in there. So now if we write this and quit, then you have to, if you change it, then you have to source that file again. So now you can see that the little thing there at the beginning changed. And so it gives like a little different font colors, and some of them are fancier than others. Like, where is it? This, yeah, this one is like the crazy fancy one. Like if you're in a Git repo, it tells you what branch you're on, and if you make a change, it'll like change the color. Yeah, so that's that one's pretty cool. I've used that one before. And a lot of the themes use Powerline fonts, so you have to, if you want to use some of the fancier ones, you have to install these Powerline fonts, but that's not tough. Just copy and paste this. All it does is downloads them from GitHub, changes into it, runs that install script, which puts them in the right directory, resets the font cache, such and such. Yeah, so that's not tough. But yeah, so there's also a lot of, so with themes, it also has a lot of plugins, they call them. And what the plugins are like typical aliases for different things. So like if you go into the plugins directory, there's one for, let's see. So these are like all different files with aliases and functions and stuff. Where's a good one? Okay, so if we go into like the Git one. So you can take a look and see like everything that it's doing. So these are like functions that you can run. Then here's they have like a whole bunch of aliases for stuff that you can use. Like all of these are aliases. So let's say we wanted to, let's go back. So let's say we're scrolling through and we see, ooh, Nyan. Is that Nyan cat? Huh. All right, let's try that one out. Okay, so if we edit that .cshrc folder or file, if we scroll down, oh yeah, another thing that's kind of cool is this option right here. You can, for a ZSH theme, you can actually set this to random, and then every time you load your terminal, it'll give you a different one. If you set it to random, here you can give it a list of like themes that you want, and then it'll just pick a random one from this list and give that to you every time you load up a new terminal window. It's just kind of cool. I mean, it doesn't help productivity in any way, but it's neat. Yeah, a bunch of different options here. You can have it, I haven't actually tried this out, but you can enable auto correction. So if you like screw up typing a command, it'll like try and auto correct it for you. I haven't tried that out yet. see, okay, plugins, this is what I was looking for. So it does the get one by default. Let's add a Nyan in here. And then we'll source that. So it looks like it gives you a command and C. Netcat. Oh, Nyan. Let's try that. So yeah, completely pointless, but there's actually helpful ones too. So like with that Git plugin, if you you know how before if you do alias LL, it'll tell you what it is. If you just hit alias, it'll actually list all of the aliases that you have registered. And so if you do that, you'll get this huge list of like all the Git ones that it gives you. And now it's like, honestly, right now, I hardly use any of these Git ones. It's like you only use it if you like are actually doing those commands, obviously. So like, don't try and hunt out to use an alias when you don't actually do that command at all. Yeah, let's see. I think that's about it for all my ZSH. Yeah, okay. So then the last thing I want to go through is SSH keys. So what an SSH key is, if you, let's say I opened that one already. So let's say you have an account on Shell and you want to connect. When you SSH into it, you give your username at the shell.cs.une.edu. And then you have to enter your password. And so like every time you SSH, you have to enter your password every time. What an SSH key does is it'll generate a public and private key. And I don't know a whole lot about encryption and encryption algorithms and stuff. But what it does when you register your SSH key with like the Shell server, and then if you SSH into Shell, if it's registered on the server already, you don't have to like type your password in. And it helps with other things too. So like you can use SSH keys with GitHub, because if you have like a private repository, you can't use the normal method for pushing and stuff. You have to use the SSH method. And so it helps a lot with like GitHub, so you don't have to type your password in every time. So I'll just walk through quickly how you can do that. So to first generate a key, you run this command. It's just SSH keygen. Let's see. So the -t RSA is like the encryption algorithm that it uses, and RSA is like the standard modern algorithm to use. The -b 4096 is the number of bits to use, and that the more bits you use, the tougher it is to crack it by brute force. And 4096 is the like standard bits to use as well. And this -c is just like a comment that you can attach to the key file. So let's say we wanted to create this just for the Shell server. You could say like kkarbowiak@shell.cs.une.edu. And so that's going to generate the key pairs. and you can specify the file name that you want to save it under. So by default, it creates them all under this .ssh folder. And if you're creating it for the first time, like this ID underscore RSA is like your default key that the system uses when it doesn't know what else to use, is this ID underscore RSA. But so you can give it a custom name too, like I'll do ID shell. So you can give it a passphrase. I'm just going to leave it empty for now. So then if we cd into SSH and list it out. So I already created a couple. So I have this ID GitHub that I have registered on GitHub. This ID RSA is the default one, like I said before. Oops, I think it actually, oh yeah. Since I wasn't in the SSH folder, it just installed them in the directory I was in. So I'm gonna move these into .ssh. Okay, there. Yeah, so we can take a look. So you want to be careful with these. So the one without an extension is the private key. Private key is one that you is very confidential. Like you don't want to accidentally like send it to someone, or if you're doing a screencast like this, you don't want to accidentally print it on your screen because then people can see your private key. The public key, I mean, you don't want to give that out either, but it's not as bad. So if we just type that, the public key, and the .pub is just saying that it's the public key. So this is what it looks like. This is the key. And then here tacked on to the bottom is the comment that we gave it. So next, let's see. So next, if we want to use this with the shell server, we first need to copy it over onto shell. And to do that, you can do SSH copy ID is the command. If we take a look at it. So you use this -i flag to say what identity file you're using. If you don't specify -i, it uses the ID underscore RSA since that's the default one. So if I do -i, we want to do SSH ID shell and kcarboviak at shell.csw. Oh, wait, I actually need to connect to the VPN first here. Gotta do that quick. Okay, so what it's telling us is it's attempting to log in. Let's see, trying to filter out any that have been installed. One key remained to be installed if you're prompted. Okay, so if we SSH into kcarboviak at shell.cs.uni.edu. Okay, so actually I forgot. So I already registered the ID RSA onto shell, and so let me try canceling out of this. And let me do the -i SSH ID shell. Okay, there we go. So you can see when we use the identity file, it didn't ask us for our password. But actually, with key files, it's actually suggested that you do protect it with a password, because let's say you didn't, when you generated them, if you didn't set it up with a password, if someone stole your computer, they can just SSH into all the servers that you have set up without a password or anything. So now if you generated a key file, but now you want to add a password to it, you do that SSH keygen, you do -p, and then I believe you just, wait, hold on a second, keygen -p. Then I think we, oops, shell. Let's see, what was the option again? Oh, -f. There we go. F ID shell. Okay, so now we want to enter a passphrase for it. Enter the same one again. Okay, so now it's saved with a passphrase. But so now if we go to SSH into shell again, ID shell. But now, since we have it set up with a passphrase, now we have to enter the password. And you may ask yourself, what the heck was the point of that? So what we can do now with that, and for some reason, Shell's been super slow today, so it would let me do stuff already. Okay. So now what we can do is there's something called an SSH agent. And what that does is you can create an SSH agent and add your add any key files that you want to it. And when you add it, you type the password in up front. And then after that, you don't have to pass it in again. And then when you're done, you can just kill the SSH agent, and then it forgets everything. So if we want to do that, so the command is SSH agent -s will create it. And so what it actually does is it creates the agent, but it creates these environment variables that you need to set. And so to set those, because if we just try to do SSH agent PID, it's blank because it just printed this out to the screen. It didn't actually run that at all. So if we actually want to have that ran, we can do eval SSH agent -s. And so what that'll do is whatever is returned by SSH agent -s, this eval will evaluate it as if you typed it in yourself. And it's another command within a command thing. So now it gave us PID, and if we echo, we'll actually get it. So now it's actually set up for us. So now if we want to add a key to it, the command is SSH add. Oops. Gotta remember the flag. Oh yeah, you just give it the path. So if we do SSH add ID shell, so we enter the passphrase that we set up for it, then it tells you it added it. If you want to look to see what all keys you have registered, there's -L, and that'll gives us the number of bits. This is like a signature for it, and then this is the name ID shell. So now if we go and SSH shell cscmd.edu, and so now we didn't have to enter our passphrase. because it was registered with the SSH agent. And so if we need to do it again, then it'll just automatically pull it from the SSH agent again. So it's really helpful if you're doing something and you need like multiple terminal windows like into shell at the same time, or if you get into like making a script that'll like sync files with shell. If you didn't set up a key pair, you would have to enter in your password every single time. But if you set up a key pair for it, you can like automate scripts to do stuff for you. Which I mean, you with assignments and stuff now, you may not be doing a whole lot of that, but in the future, it can be super helpful. So if we want to, first off, if we accidentally added a key that we didn't want to, we can, from SSH add, we can delete a single identity or we can delete all identities. So if we're done for the day, we want to delete everything so that all the identities are removed. And then to kill the SSH agent, we go SSH agent -K for kill. Eval that. So now it's killed. So now if we SSH back, now we have to enter our passphrase again because the agent is now gone. And then one more quick thing. Stupid shell. One more quick thing is you can set up configs with SSH. So to make it even shorter, what's super annoying is having to type in kcarboviak@shell.cs.und.edu. So one thing that we can do to shorten that is in this SSH directory, if it's not created for you, you can create it yourself, this config file. So if we open that up, so we can actually set up basically shortcuts for places that we want to SSH into. So I created this one. It's the, I just called it shell. So host name is shell.cs.und.edu. I'll change this to shell. So you give it host name, user, and then the identity file that you want to use for it. So if we write that, so again, if we want to set up the SSH agent, do that, SSH add ID shell. So pass that in. So now all I got to do is SSH shell, and it'll go straight into it, which is, again, super nice if you have to do it over and over and over and over again. And it's also nice if you, I mean, it's kind of setting it up for reuse as well. If you want, like if the server changes the host name, all you have to do is go into your config, change the host name. You don't have to remember the new host name because you set it up with just the shell shortcut. So it's handy for that as well. Yeah. So then, oops. Oh yeah, and I'll also show you. So we're on shell right now. When we did that that SSH copy ID command, and so what that does in the SSH directory on shell, it creates this file called authorized keys, and so it copies the public key into this file. So if we cat that, we can see, so this is I have two key files in there right now. That's one of them. This bottom one is the one we just created, and you can tell by the comment down here. And that's why it's nice to leave a comment on it so you can tell which goes to which. Yeah, and so what happens if we exit from shell? You can actually see what happens if we do SSH shell, and then we pass in -v is the verbose flag. It'll actually tell us like, and you can do VV for more verbose, but it'll tell us like every single thing that it's doing. Because typically it just does it behind the hood and you have no idea what it's doing. So if we read through this, you can see reading configuration data in the config file. So you can see that's going out to your config file, and then it finds that shell shortcut that I set up. So then it says connecting the shell. And then it's has the identity file, so you can see like the process that it's going through. So it's going to the config file, seeing you have something set up. Then it sees the identity file that you tied it to. It goes out and grabs that. Does a whole bunch of uninteresting stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so then basically what it does is it gets that key file and it does kind of like a back and forth between the server. It's like, hey, I have a key file. And then the server's like, oh yeah, like I recognize that, sends it back to your computer. And then it's like, oh, okay. And, you know, like a back and forth of few messages. And authentication succeeded with the public key, then authenticated, and then you're to your shell. So there's actually like a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes when you SSH, and you can, with a lot of commands, if you pass in like -v or -vv, you can print out it verbosely, and it'll tell you like every single thing that it's doing. Yeah, so that's all I got for today. Does anybody have any questions or comments or? Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for coming.